Hi, good morning. Lazy mornings, all this daily season. It's really difficult to get early in the anyways. So the next topic which I would be starting from today is scalable interface. Now, yesterday itself we have finished with the future methods and understand like what is purpose of future method. Apart from the mixed DML exception, future method can also be used whenever if you wanted to just split two things. For example, see, although I'm telling you one thing, in real time we just use the future method for setup and non-setup. Whenever we wanted to find ATML operations on both of them, so usually use the future method. But एक चीज और है, the जैसे मान के चलिए कि दो ऑपरेशंस है. Now let's not talk about कि ये जो दो ऑपरेशंस हो रहे हैं सेटअप पर है या नॉन सेटअप है. Simply let's try to understand कि हाँ पे ऐसे थोड़ी देर के लिए आप और मैं हम लोग ऐसा assume करते हैं कि the operation which we are trying to perform, maybe that is both of them are on setup or maybe both on setup. But किसी वजह से for any reasons, if you wanted to make a split in, that means you wanted that one of them should be executed synchronously while the other one should be executed asynchronously. That means for any reason, if we wanted to make a split into that the operation should be get performed. The operation should be get performed with by maintaining two separate transactions. Now let me try to give you an example of that. तब हो सकता है आप सिर्फ ऐसा मेरे बोलने पर शायद आप इसको विजुअलाइज ना कर. तो हम ऐसा अज्यूम करते हैं कि what we are performing is like थोड़ी देर के मैं trying to construct an example for. तो हम ऐसा अज्यूम करते हैं कि let's understand that like this is an external system. This is an external system. Let's consider that this is an external system. And this external system is sending us a few of the parameters, right? Let's say this is object one. This is an external system. This is an external system. And this external system, by the way, is sending us a few of the parameters, which we are taking this inside field one. So we are taking this inside field one of object. That means we have a certain form of integration, by the way, by which you are taking the parameters from this external system, and let's say you are storing this inside field. And once you receive that inside object one, object of inside field one of the object, and by the way, this is your sales force, all right? So this is your sales force. You wanted to perform certain DML operation on that, or maybe you are after certain validation, let's say after certain validation, you are transferring that record. You are transferring that record to maybe some other field of the same object, or it could be some other object field as well. So this is, let's say, field 2. But what this process is describing, I'm trying to describe, is one external system, all right? And we are getting some data from that external system. And initially we were going to store that data inside, let's say field one of any object. Now, after performing certain what to say, certain validations or maybe some form of data cleanup, we are transferring that data to field. Simple operation. So initially we are receiving data inside field 1 and then we are transferring that into field. Now see, if you would observe this, how come data is coming inside field 1? By the way, the data is coming from an external source. Data is coming from external source to field. Whereas onto field 2, it's coming from field 1. It's from field 2, it's coming from field 1. So I could say that, inside in the field 1, data is coming from external source, whereas inside in field 2, it is coming from the Salesforce itself. Object to object transfer हो सकता है, या फिर same object to field transfer हो सकता है. So the suavity, if I would now talk on this other perspective, where I wanted to understand like which one seems to be more promising to me, which one seems to be more convenient to me, and which I could assume that is going to be happening synchronously. That is field 1 to field data transfer. Understand this. I can understand that's a big level, that's a high level example of, but that is what I have a real time example for this. I mean, अगर मैं जो आपसे बात कर रहा था, अगर उसको मैं example में convert करूं तो मेरे हिसाब से सबसे best example फिलहाल यही. I was trying to make you convince like मान के चलिए कि if there is a transaction, if there is a program on which there are two things is happening. Let's consider that this whole logic, this whole logic we have created inside a program. This whole logic we have created inside a program. There is a program. There is a program. Now this is that program. And now inside in this program, we are performing two things. We are getting the data from external resource and capturing it and storing it inside field 1. And then in the same program, we are transferring that data from field 1 to field. So there is one program which is managing this whole thing. Now, if I would see from a developer perspective, I wanted to create a program for this. Looking into this requirement, I clearly understand one thing. I clearly understand one thing, that getting the data from external, this one, getting the data from external and then storing this into field 1. I mean, when you are capturing the data from some external resource, or when you are capturing the data with a web service, say, when you are getting the things by the integrations, if you are getting the things from integration. One second, please. Excuse me. Yeah. So this, when you're trying to get something with an integration, this is something, which is always an unpredicted entity. This part of the program would always be an unpredicted entity. Why? Whereas this part is something which is absolutely predicted. Let me talk on to that reason first of all. See, I can straightly take you to the queryable interface. I could definitely start in a way. But there are a few of the things which I feel that you should know before going to queryable interface. And that is the reason we are discussing this. Otherwise, today we started late. Or ideally, I should start with the queryable. I'm taking my time to make understand about these things, right? So inside, I wanted to construct a program where there are two separate requirements, but I wanted to construct that whole into a same program. There are two things: getting the data from an external source and storing this into the field one, and then transferring that data from field one to the field, maybe of the same object, maybe of the other object. When looking into this requirement, it seems to me that the first one, getting the data from an external source and storing this into field one, this is quite uncertain at this moment. Whereas transferring the data from field one to field two is absolutely promised. Why? Because this whole is happening within the Salesforce itself. This is something which is coming from external. Now see, but understand. If you would not get the data into the field one, there's nothing that you could transfer into field two. So this operation, this operation, transferring the data from field one and then storing it into the field two, that completely depends on to this fact whether data is available onto field one, whether data is available onto field one or not. So when I have these two operations, all right, when I have these two operations, and let's consider both of them falls into non-setup object. You are getting data, let's say, into the field of account, and maybe you are transferring that data into another field of account or maybe a field of contact. All right. Now, account is a non-setup object, by the way. Contact also is a non-setup object. So the operation what you are performing is between non-setup and non-setup. That means there is no question of getting that mixed DML exception to be get raised over. It's not possible. Because initially, when you are getting that data into a field, that field is of account. That's a non-setup object. When you are transferring that from field one to field one, maybe that field is again account or a contact or opportunity, whatever it is. But again, the field is non-setup object. So very obviously, there is no question. Very obviously, there is no question that we are going to hit with mixed DML exception. It's not possible. But still, I would be splitting this into two separate business logic. I'm going to split this program into two separate things. This particular portion where I wanted to transfer data from field 1 to field 2, this I'm going to design into future. Whereas this portion, I'll keep it synchronous. I would keep it synchronous. Or vice versa, even vice versa is also possible. This is not important that the second part should always be. No. Vice versa also. I can design this in a future method, getting the data to field 1, and then I'll keep it synchronous. The second part from transferring the data from field 1 to field 2, I'll keep it synchronous. Mudde wali baat ye hai, the more important here is to understand, I'm going to split this into two separate lots. One of them I'm definitely going to design inside in future. Why so? Because see, there is an uncertainty. See, the data would transferring data to field 2 completely depends on to this fact that field 1 should have that data. If there is no data inside field 1, if there is no data, or maybe the field 1 is not containing the fresh copy, जैसे कि अभी मान के चलो कि ये वाला डेटा यहाँ पे एक्सपोर्ट होके आया ही नहीं है, ठीक है, ये डेटा यहाँ पे एक्सपोर्ट होके आया ही नहीं है, and right now it is containing the old copy. Right now it is containing the old copy, whereas this one is the fresh copy. If this is like, this is the fresh copy, this is the fresh copy, but field 1 not containing right now, field 1 is not containing that fresh copy, rather it's containing the old data. And if you would have initiated this into the same program, so what is going to be happen? ये जब यहाँ से यहाँ जाएगा तो ये old data जाएगा, जबकि जाना क्या चाहिए था आपका? जाना चाहिए था ये. So I wanted to delay this process unless and until यहाँ field 1 पे जो है, field 1 पे आपका new वाला data. So how I'm going to put that delay? So in this case, I'm going to make a split of methods over here. I would construct two separate methods, one for getting data from external resource into the Salesforce field, whatever field, and then another method to get the data from field 1 and transfer it to field. So I'm going to split this into two separate methods. And one of them I'll be making as a future. Any one of them. But in my case, I'm going to do this with the second form field. When the transfer is between field 1 and field, still although both of them are set up, non-set up object itself, but I'm going to design this. Because this part, integration would going to handle this part. Integration would going to handle this part. So the second part where we are transferring data from one field to another field, this I'm going to design into future method. So that, once this operation is completed, only after that this is going to be initiated. And it would not be initiated within the same transaction. That is more important. All right. So whenever, now let's conclude this. Whenever you have any such a kind of requirement where you intentionally wanted to split the logic into two parts, where you intentionally wanted to split the logic into two parts, when you wanted certain things to be performed separately or maintain a separate transaction, that time, that time, we would create that business logic inside a future and we make a separation of all right. Now, so apart from what is apart from removing that mixed DML exception, apart from working on setup and non-setup object, apart from working on setup and non-setup, there is also one another reason where we can use future methods. That is what I have just demonstrated to you. But चलो अब ये अगर आप समझ चुके तो फिर मैं अगली बात करता हूँ. देखिए, मिक्स डीएमएल एक्सेप्शन अगर आपको आता है तो मेरी बात ध्यान से सुनो कि there is no another way to handle this apart from the future method. There is no another way to handle that apart from future method. Yes, मिक्स डीएमएल एक्सेप्शंस को हटाने का सबसे प्रॉमिसिंग तरीका ही होता है फ्यूचर मेथड. हाँ, लेकिन चलिए उसके अलावा उसका एक इस्तेमाल और हो सकता है जो मैंने अभी आपको इस पे in a program, if I wanted to separate between the business logic, I wanted that certain portion of the program should be executed in a separate business logic. So if I wanted a certain portion of the program should be executed in a separate business logic, in that case as well, we can make a use of a future method. अब इतना मतलब फ्यूचर मेथड दो तरह से आप इस्तेमाल कर सकते. एक तो जब आपको मिक्स डीएमएल एक्सेप्शन है, जब आप एक ही ट्रांजैक्शन में सेटअप और नॉन सेटअप ऑब्जेक्ट का डीएमएल परफॉर्म करना चाहते हो. एंड सेकंड, इफ इंटेंशनली यू वांटेड टू सेपरेट द लॉजिक, अब हम सेकंड पोर्शन पे जाते हैं. फर्स्ट का कोई रिप्लेसमेंट नहीं, हम सेकंड पोर्शन पे जाते हैं कि when I am using a future method just to make a separation between two business logics. Inside in my program, there is no setup, no non-setup. I am not using a combination of setup and non-setup. Inside in my program, if I am not using the combination of setup and non-setup, that means there is no possibility of getting big HTML exception. All right. But still, due to certain circumstances, I wanted to split the logic in a way that certain portion of program should be executed synchronously, whereas the remaining portion of the program, I wanted it to get executed asynchronously. Due to certain reason. उसमें से एक reason I just have demonstrated that example to you guys. आपको वो example भी रहना चाहिए कि maybe in the interview if they would ask you, so at least you should have one example with them. तो वो example भी मैंने आपको बताया. So when we are using a future method for that purpose, splitting the logic into two separate transactions, then we face certain problems. Now, what are those drawbacks? Let's now come to this topic. See, I can directly start today's session from here. Future method have certain drawbacks. You cannot supply S object as a parameter, whereas you can supply only primitive as a parameter over. If this is your future method, by the way, yesterday we created that. What was the name? was that class common helper, all right. So common helper. So if this method is my future method, if this method is my future method, by the way, and if I would try to pass out like an integer parameter, no, this is perfect, it is perfect. It is perfect. If you would try to pass on an integer parameter. Okay. So यहाँ पे अभी let me give like 45 to it. Let me try to save that. Let's see what happens. No errors at all. No errors. You are calling this method over here and you have passed a parameter 45 to this. 45 is what? It's an integer parameter. That's a primitive parameter, by the way. That's a primitive parameter. A primitive data type. Integer, string, dates, है ना? Data type दो तरह के होते हैं हमने पढ़ा. But what happens if I would try to transfer like an account, and let's say I have account ACC. Now in this case, I'm trying to transfer what? I'm trying to transfer a S object as a parameter. I'm trying to transfer S object. Let's say I'm trying to transfer a record of account. Okay. So in that case, what is the error? Do you see one thing? Future method do not support parameter type of account. Future method do not support parameter type of account. Not just account. This is where यहाँ पे account लिखा इसलिए. I can make it like contact. And when I try to save to see what happens. Future method does not support type of contact. It means if you are trying to pass on certain parameters to the future method, you can only give as a primitive data type as a parameter, whereas you cannot give as object. That is the first drawback. That is the first drawback of a future method. If I wanted to transfer parameters to the future method, the method which I have defined as future. See, methods are of two types. You know that. Parameterized, non-parameterized. I'm not talking about methods and functions and procedures. All right. Yes, you know everything. I have taught you. Methods are of two types: functions, procedures. Procedure does not return anything. The return type is void. Functions return something. All right, that is a category. Yes. Again, there is one category. There could be two forms of methods. Those who contains the parameter are parameterized. Those who does not contain any parameter inside. That's a non-parameterized method. So if you wanted to pass a parameter to a method which has been defined as future, it can only accept primitive data, IDs, string, integer, double, boolean, date, time. These all are what? These all are your primitive data. Whereas if you, by any reason, for example, I wanted to transfer, let's say due to certain reasons, I wanted to transfer a record of account or contact to this. It is not possible because it does not accept S object as a parameter. That is a drawback of a future method. That is a drawback of a future method. You cannot give S object as a parameter. But sometimes in interview, abhi meri baat dhyan se suno and mark this. I don't know. This has not been written in the notes anywhere. So you either could write it. अगर आपकी याददाश्त बहुत अच्छी है तो याद रखो. Otherwise, जितना मैं आप लोगों के बारे में जानता हूँ, मेरे हिसाब से आप लोगों को लिख लेना चाहिए. So if in the interview, if he would ask, is there any way that we could transfer S object as a parameter to the future methods? Is there any way that we could transfer S object? For example, I wanted to transfer an account record as a parameter to future. I wanted to transfer an account record as a parameter. Is there any way to do that? See, I'm taking you beyond this whole discussion. I know it's taking time. It's taking time, but what you are learning, is commonly it is not discussed in any class. This is my future method, by the way. This is my future method. This is my future method. And all right, so I have designed a query where this query is returning me one user. This query is returning me one user, isn't it? This query is returning me one user. So what I'm doing, see what I'm doing. If I would transfer that this as a parameter, यानी मैं यहाँ पे वो यूजर भेजने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ, मतलब मैं ऐसा ऑब्जेक्ट भेज रहा हूँ, ऑलराइट, ऐसा ऑब्जेक्ट भेज रहा हूँ, तो मुझे 100% एरर आने वाला है। यूजर जिसे कुछ नाम देता हूँ मैं फिर से यूजर वन नाम का एक वेरिएबल है। और सिंपली दिस वन, यहाँ से आई एम, बिकॉज एक ही रिकॉर्ड है ना, एक ही रिकॉर्ड है, तो आई कैन डायरेक्टली ट्रांसफर दैट, तो यहाँ पे मुझे ऑब्वियसली फिर से वही एरर आने वाला है, दैट फीचर मेथड डू नॉट सपोर्ट पैरामीटर टाइप ऑफ यूजर, फीचर मेथड डज नॉट सपोर्ट पैरामीटर टाइप ऑफ यूजर। यू कैन सी मैं क्या कर रहा हूँ, आई एम ट्राइंग टू ट्रांसफर, मतलब ये यहाँ से मैंने एक यूजर फेच किया, और उसको कहाँ रखा है मैंने, यूजर टू, ये एक वेरिएबल है। Now this variable I'm passing as a parameter to this method. This is my future method. I'm transferring one user record. I'm transferring one user record which I'm trying to take it into this variable. आप कुछ भी नाम दे सकते हो, उसको जरूरी नहीं यूजर वन का, इट्स अ टेम्पररी थिंग, मैं ऐसे नाम कभी नहीं देता हूँ, ये बस आप लोगों को समझाने के लिए। दिस इज अ वेरिएबल, उसका डेटा टाइप भी लिखना जरूरी। तो यहाँ पे इमीडिएटली वी गॉट दिस एरर कि भाई साहब आप नहीं कर सकते, यू कैन नॉट ट्रांसफर एन एस ऑब्जेक्ट एज अ पैरामीटर टू एनी फ्यूचर मेथड, चाहे वो अकाउंट हो, चाहे वो कॉन्टैक्ट हो, अपॉर्चुनिटी, और मे बी इट्स अ यूजर। You cannot transfer S object as a parameter. Cannot transfer S object as a parameter to any future method, and you can see this by your own. अब जो मैं बताने जा रहा हूँ, this is beyond a discussion, and by the way, it is not written into your notes as well. This is beyond a discussion. Yeah, please इसको ना लिख लेना। Is there any way to transfer a record of an object to future method? Is there any way to transfer a record of an object to the future method? क्या आप एक फ्यूचर मेथड को, क्या कोई तरीका है ऐसा, इज देयर इज एनी वे जिसके जिसके जिसकी मदद से, सो इज देयर इज एनी वे, क्या कोई ऐसा तरीका है जिसकी मदद से आप फ्यूचर मेथड को एक रिकॉर्ड ट्रांसफर कर सकते? You would immediately say this no, right? Because you learned this and I have demonstrated. I was trying to transfer a record of user. ये query ने जो कोई भी record मेरे को return किया है, that I have stored this inside a variable, and this variable I'm trying to transfer to this, right? And you clearly see feature method does not support parameter of S object, and you would say no to this. But I'll show you one way to see. If I would try to transfer an ID, instead of transferring the whole record, when I transfer the whole record, that becomes an S object. But when I take it as an ID, now let me try to save this, see what happens. Gone. Error is gone. Because see what I did just now. This is the way. और ये कोई नहीं बताएगा आपको. I'm telling you, nobody would going to tell you this. इतना डीप से कोई नहीं पढ़ाता है पहली बार. You cannot transfer a whole record. You cannot transfer S object. If I was trying to transfer this whole record, means I was trying to transfer S object, parameter of type S object. But जब मैंने सिर्फ ID भेजा उसका, when I am transferring this ID only, that means ID is what? ID is a primitive data type, isn't it? So instead of transferring the whole record, I am just transferring ID of that record. And now over here, I'm not collecting this inside what? Inside user. I'm collecting this inside an ID variable. ID is what? It's a primitive data. Now what I can do over here is, I can fire a query similar to this. I can fire a query similar to this over here as well. Matlab, I can have a query. देखो, matlab, I can have a query. Oh, like this. अभी आप ये पहले ये समझो कि मैंने क्या किया. Just give me 1 second, guys. 1 second. All right. So what I did is like, to this future method, I have not transferred the complete record of user, rather the ID of that user. Now I can have a query like this. I can have a query select ID username from the user where, let me make certain changes, where ID equals to, because I'm getting it dynamically, ID equals to, so, right? And then you have stored it inside this query. Let me try to save this. All right. Now I can even print that system.debug user record equals to plus, let me make this as user deactivate, just to distinguish between above and lower, right? Let's try to save this. Now what is going to be happen would be in this case, like 1 to start 24. Just trying to make certain changes over here. And this user is already deactivated. All right, this user already is deactivated. So even if you want, we can, can just repeat the example. Let me do one thing. The changes कर देता हूँ मैं program. This user, as you can see, has been deactivated. तो मैं उसको वापस active कर देता हूँ. आप उसको reactivate भी कर सकते थे, program से भी कर सकते थे. चलो इसको मैंने reactivated कर दिया. And now let me execute this program. अभी देखो आप फिर से यहाँ execution is not important. More important is what you did with this. यहाँ मुझे इस future method में I wanted to transfer a user record. Which if I would try to मैं अगर directly ये variable का value यहाँ पे दे दूँ तो it was showing me the error because future method cannot have s object as a parameter, right? But अगर ये क्वेश्चन आता है इंटरव्यू में तो अभी आपके सामने वो पूरा प्रोग्राम है. Let me I'll just copy and paste this out 1 second. I'll do one thing. I'll take this. I'm going to update your notes by the way for this. So yes, over here was here, or maybe before we could start this. Let me create a space over there. If for any reasons, we need to transfer S object record as a parameter to the future method. So if in any way, if by any reasons, if we require to transfer a record of S object as a parameter, how to do that, right? This is that way. This program will demonstrate this. So you cannot transfer the complete record. If I would try, if I would try just to pass on this whole record, it was showing me the error. Of course, it was showing, because in that case, I was collecting this inside user variable, because user record was getting transferred. Agar account record aa raha hai, तो obviously you have to take it inside account. Like this query was returning one record of user. So I have defined a variable of type user. If this query would return me a record of account, I'm going to define an account variable for this. Very obviously, you know this fact. So because I was trying to transfer a user record, I was collecting this inside user. A variable of the user 1, 2, give any name. So that time you are getting this error. The future method cannot have S object as a parameter. So instead of doing that, what I did, instead of transferring the S object record, I have transferred the ID of that, just ID. And so I have taken this, because ID is getting transferred from one method to another method. I have defined an ID variable. I'm just capturing an ID over here. So what now it would do? Like, ID has been transferred. पहली बात तो error हट चुका है. चलो, now let me try to save and run this program once again. तो वो user deactivate हो जाना चाहिए, है ना? तो user आपका deactivate हो जाना चाहिए और एक नया record insert होना चाहिए hiring method. This is what I am expecting. So let me execute this. और system.debug लगा रखिए. But that is because of future method. Of course, मैंने future method में इसको खींच लिया है, तो it's not going to print in any case. और मैंने debug एक और जगह जहाँ से मैं कोशिश करता हूँ आपको दिखाने की, लग नहीं कि मैंने debug enable किया हुआ. चलो, but anyways, ठीक है. तो we can see it from here as well. यहाँ से भी देख सकते हैं. Now if I would refresh this, ये यूजर हमारा डीएक्टिवेट हो गया और हायरिंग मैनेजर के अंदर एक नया रिकॉर्ड इंसर्ट हो चुका होगा. 310 रिकॉर्ड थे, इफ आई एम नॉट रॉन्ग. नाउ 311 रिकॉर्ड्स आर देयर, राइट? हाँ, तो मैं जिस तरीके की बात कर रहा था वो ये होता है कि इफ यू कैन नॉट सी एनीथिंग ओवर हियर, अगर आपको यहाँ पे नजर ना आए तो आप व्हाट वी यूजुअली डू इज लाइक वी इनेबल समथिंग कॉल्ड एज डीबग. Debug mode. So inside in the monitor menu, you are going to get this. How you can do that is like, for your user, what you have to do is like, first of all, go with this. ये debug कैसे on करते हैं वो मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ. देख लीजिए एक नई चीज है. अरे यार, one second. He logins. I don't know how, but गलत जगह क्लिक कर दिया. So see, go to your monitor menu, and inside in the monitor menu we have something called as logs, and inside in the log you will make a click on to debug logs. Now for a particular user, you can generate the debug log from here as well. What I'm going to do would be like trace entities user or particular class, if you wanted to you wanted like that class should be only, or maybe a trigger should be traced, तो आप वो उसमें से देख सकते हो, या फिर आप सीधा यूजर ले सकते हो. तो हियर यू आर गोइंग टू गेट द लिस्ट ऑफ ऑल यूजर्स. ठीक है, अभी यहाँ जैसे रियल टाइम में बहुत सारे यूजर्स रहते हैं, तो आप अपना यूजर सिलेक्ट कर सकते हो या फिर जिसका ट्रेस करना. मेक चेंजेस ओवर हियर. तो फ्रॉम स्टार्टिंग फ्रॉम 26 to 30 तक जितने भी प्रोग्राम्स ये यूजर एग्जीक्यूट करेगा, दे ऑल आर गोइंग टू बी गेट ट्रेस्ड. ठीक है. सो लेवल इज समथिंग व्हाट टू बी ट्रेस्ड. तो कुछ कंपनीज में दे हैव अ कस्टमाइज्ड लेवल दैट यू हैव टू सेलेक्ट, बट इन मोस्ट ऑफ द केसेस, in most almost in 95% of the cases, you just have to select dev console. ठीक है. If because we usually execute our program from the dev console itself, right? So if we have another IDE for that, then we have to select. So I'm telling you 95% you always have to make this selection. Now when you would save this, so what is going to be happen, right? 24 hours. All right, so I can take it like 27. Oh, I can take it like 27 only. So I would be selecting a user, and then this user I'm selecting, and maybe I can take 27. 24 hours ka hi bol raha hai ye. So dev console, and let me now save this. So now one debug log has been created. अभी ये मुझे पहले करना चाहिए था before performing this execution. ये जो execution मैंने किया है उसके पहले मुझे करना चाहिए. So what would happen in that case? अभी ये वाला तो नहीं, लेकिन हाँ ये पुराना वाला मैं आपको दिखाता हूँ. So इस तरह का एक log generate होता था, and then you make a click and you go to that log, and then you would going to see कि अगर कोई workflow execute हुआ है, कोई query execute हुई है, तो query अगर execute हुई है तो आपको उसका record यहाँ पर मिल जाता था. अगर कोई वर्कफ्लो, कोई वैलिडेशन रूल आपके एपेक्स कोड से क्या हुआ, दैट यू आर गोइंग टू सी. ठीक है. तो अभी हमारी केस में लाइक वी जस्ट हैव एग्जीक्यूटेड एन एपेक्स कोड एंड एसक्यूएल क्वेरी. तो इन दैट केस व्हाट इज गोइंग टू बी हैपन वुड बी लाइक हमको उसका रिकॉर्ड नहीं यहाँ पे नजर आता. ये व्हाट हैज बीन हैपन. तो जैसे अभी आपको लॉग जनरेट नहीं हुआ बिकॉज एसिंक्रोनस क्वांटिटी, सिस्टम डॉट डीबग मैंने लगाया बट स्टिल मुझे दिखाई नहीं दिया. तो वो वहां से नहीं, लेकिन यहाँ से आप देख सकते हो. दिस इज अनदर वे टू सी दैट. इसीलिए आई शो यू समथिंग. इसीलिए I'll try to show you something. Yeah. See, this I have created a batch class, right? I have created a batch class. This is my batch class, by the way, that implements database.batchable, you can understand. Database.batch. Now, see, inside in my batch class, as you can see, this is start method and execute. I have written system.debug inside execute method. Although we all know one thing, that system.debug would, I mean, even though if this program would be executed, you cannot see system.debug's output onto the developer console. But still, I have written this. Why? Here also I have written system.debug inside in my execute method, or anywhere else, like I have written system.debug. I know one thing, like this is what I was trying to say. Even though if you cannot see the log of over developer console, you can track it from debug. You can track it from debug. So it is going to show that over here. This is the way. So whenever you wanted to track the results, what we do, this is called a debug mode. So we enable the debug first of all, and then we execute it. So this way, like, even though you can track the results of asynchronous quantities as well. यहाँ देखो मैंने जो सिस्टम डीबग्स लगा रखी है, इसका आउटपुट मुझे डीबग कंसोल पे, डेवलपर कंसोल पे नहीं मिल रहा. Because this is an asynchronous program. Bash program, future methods, queuable, schedulable, these all are asynchronous. जब ये एग्जीक्यूट होता है आपको डेवलपर कंसोल पे कुछ नहीं मिलेगा. बट फिर मैंने सिस्टम डॉट डीबग क्यों लगा रहा है कि उसका इंप्रेशन यहाँ पे आएगा, यहाँ पे उसका इंप्रेशन ट्रेस होता है. ठीक है. तो ये होता है बेसिकली डीबग. ऑलराइट. सो चलो, दो चार चीजें नया आपने सीखा आज. दैट वाज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट इन माय opinion. That was very important. Whatever you have learned so far was very important. वैसे टॉपिक तो कुछ और था आज का. मतलब I was about to tell you like मैं कंप्लीट करता हूं अभी उसको. Was about to tell you this thing that drawbacks of future method. Future methods में कह सकते हैं कि 3 बड़े ड्रॉबैक्स हैं. पहला ड्रॉबैक ये होता है कि फ्यूचर मेथड डज नॉट प्रोवाइड यू द फैसिलिटी टू पास एस ऑब्जेक्ट एज अ पैरामीटर. If you wanted to give a parameter to future method, that could only be primitive. That can only be primitive. But then there is one workaround for this. What is that workaround? This one, this program. This program would demonstrate like if even though you cannot directly pass a record of S object, but there is a way to do that. You can pass on the IDs of that. And later on, you can collect it inside ID variable, fire a query, and get the data. This is as good as getting that user record. Against that ID, I'm firing the query. Right? I'm getting this data from user object against that ID. So indirectly, मैंने क्या लिया? मैंने यही record लिया. यही record जो इस object में store, इस variable में store. वही same record मैंने यहाँ पर भी obtain कर लिया. But this time I'm obtaining this with the help of it. So this is that workaround. इतना कोई नहीं बताता आपको. मैं telling you that frankly. इतना तो हमको भी किसी ने नहीं पढ़ाया था. We find out this way. I find out this way by my own. चलो. Then second is one future method definitely does not call another future method. Like I have told you, inside a bash program, you can call another bash program. I can call a bash program over here in the finish method. Inside in the finish method, this is my finish method. All right. This is my finish method. Inside in the finish method, I can call another batch method. I just have to create an object of that. Say एक batch class है मान के चलो, if there is a batch class, whose name is batch 4. What I can do would be like, I can just create a variable batch 4 pw equals to new batch 4. Okay, new batch 4, and then database dot execute batch. Database dot execute. Which one? pw. So what I'm doing inside in my finish method, I'm calling in another batch. Let's say there is a batch called as batch 4. Inside in my finish method, I'm calling in another batch. So yes, one batch program can call another batch program. It is possible, but you'll have to chain this within the finish method. You cannot do this with execute or start. I cannot write down this code anywhere else apart from the finish method. Understood? So one batch class can call another batch class. If you wanted to do that, we can perform this chaining over finish method. But we cannot do same with the future method. One future method cannot call another future method. There is nothing called as chaining of future. That is another drawback. One future method cannot invoke another future method. All right. Third, we does not have any tracking provisions. That means, see, I have told you one thing. Whenever a batch program gets executed, right, you can track the result although from here. Yes, for the future one also you can do that, future methods. But this is like, this is tracking the result from user interfaces. At the same time, I have told you one thing that whenever a batch class would execute, automatically this whole things get stored inside an object called as async apex job. If you remember, there is a standard object called as async apex job. Whenever a batch class would getting executed, so one record is getting created automatically inside async apex job. So what I can do is like, I can fire a query. I can fire a query over async apex job. We must have certain example. Yeah, we can fire a query over async apex job from async apex job against that that job ID, whatever has been generated. B context में वो job ID रहेगा. So we can definitely get the result, right? हम वो result को ले सकते हैं. We can track the result of after the batch has been completed. Inside in the finish method, we can track the result by firing a query on async apex job object, right? But whenever a future method executed, nothing gets stored inside async apex. So you cannot literally track the result. After execution of a future method, if you wanted to see there is only one way and this is that way, go to user interface, then go to jobs, click on to Apex job, and here is like, you can see this. But apart from this, there's no another. There's no another way. Like inside a batch program, there is a way. Whenever a batch get executed, one record is created inside async Apex job. And I can fire a query against that job ID to get what has been happened to my batch. If I wanted programmatically, if I wanted to see the status of the batch class, the execution status, I can definitely do this. After same query, if you wanted, if you would fire this query, after performing a future method, a query would be fired because query syntactically is true, but you are not going to get any result. Why? Because after executing future method, no record is created inside async Apex job. So that's why it has been written. There is no tracking mechanism. So basically, there are three major drawbacks with the future methods. We cannot supply S object as a parameter. We can only supply primitive as a parameter. We cannot perform chaining of future method. One future method cannot call another future method. And then after executing a future method, that is, after a future method is executed, no record is created inside async Apex job. So no record gets created inside async Apex job. So if you wanted to track the result, there is only one way, just to go with the user interface and access it from the Apex job page. So if you would land to this page, only is the way that you are going to find out, okay, this was a future method, and what was the name of the class, and then what was the job ID. And thus it, what was the status? This is completed, or what has been happened. This is the only way, right? Otherwise, I cannot track it from the async Apex job. So these are the three major drawbacks. These are the three major drawbacks of a future method. So that is the reason we are migrating ourselves to the viewable interfaces. So tomorrow, I'm going to discuss on to viewable. So we are going to start with viewable interface by tomorrow. Right? That is just a replacement of a future method. और वो भी कहाँ पे? We're going to talk about this by tomorrow. That's all for today. Have any questions? Yes. Do you have any questions? Anyone of you have any questions? All right. Thank you so much for your time.